We talked today about the future of work quite a bit. And if we fully embrace the notion that we'll all be enhancing our minds and our bodies with these exponential technologies, artificial intelligence, and so forth, and we assume at the same time that the technologies are growing in more of our work, if you think about the kinds of jobs we're going to return to from next week from this program, more and more of that work over time is being done by machines. What do you think us humans, again, incorporating these new technologies, what do you think will be uniquely suited to do well in the future? 30 years from now, 40 years, let's take it even further, 50, 60 years from now. What do you think will be unique to us humans when the machines get so darn good? What are we going to monopolize in this currently perceived value chain of what humans are supposed to do that makes us like productive and important?
Yeah, I just had a disagreement with Larry Page about this because we had a dialogue about it. And he was actually quoted recently saying, well, let's just work less. And this idea that we should all have jobs, I mean, most people hate their jobs. And so maybe let the machines do the work, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. And we noted there was a strike in France protesting raising the retirement age from 60 to 62. And my sense is, gee, these people really don't like their jobs. Because I have no intention of retiring anytime soon. Or another way to look at it is I actually did retire when I was 5 and decided I was going to do what I wanted to do. But there's a long history of this concern. It started in the textile industry in England around 1800 with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. There were all these machines coming out, and there was a new machine every year that could automate different aspects of weaving and the creating of cloth and the creating of clothing. And the Weavers Society had enjoyed this business model that was handed down over hundreds of years from father and mother to son and daughter. And both genders were actually involved in this craft. And suddenly machines were coming out and turning that business model on its head. And some people still had jobs, but you could identify, well, this group says they're going to have a machine that's going to do that, and a machine that's going to do this. And you could point at every job, or almost every job, and it seemed only a matter of time before those jobs were automated and eliminated. And indeed, that happened. And those jobs were automated and went away. Yet somehow employment went up, and prosperity in England went up. The Luddite movement started then in protest because they felt that soon only a very small elite would have employment. But new industries emerged, making and servicing these machines, and the common man and woman now could have a whole wardrobe and not just one shirt. And that has continued to the present day. If I were a prescient futurist in 1900, I would look around and say, okay, a third of you work on farms and a third of you work in factories, but I predict in 100 years, by the year 2000, it'll be 3% and 3%, which is what happened. And today it's 2% and 2%. And everybody go, oh my God, we're going to be out of work, what are we going to do? And say, well, don't worry, you'll get jobs being a high-tech entrepreneur and designing websites and new chip designs and robotics, and nobody would have any idea what I'm talking about. Indeed, 65% of jobs in America today are information jobs. It's very similar in throughout the developed world. And also in the developing world, are kind of skipping over various developmental steps of the developed world and developing an information economy from scratch. These information jobs didn't exist 25 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. And we're constantly creating and inventing new jobs and things to do. We had 50,000 college students in the United States in 1870. We have 12, 13 million today, and a whole infrastructure to support those students, professors and faculty and staff and so on. We have a whole entrepreneurial culture. We've got people creating music and apps and websites and all kinds of other creative endeavors of all kinds. So I see, and so We are destroying jobs at the bottom of the skill ladder. We add new jobs at the top of the skill ladder. The skill ladder moves up. In order to keep up with that rising skill ladder, we need to make people more skilled. One methodology for doing that is education. So in the developed world, we're spending 10 times as much in constant dollars per capita on K through 12 education. We have this tremendous explosion in higher education. That's going to spread dramatically with the advent of online education. We're going to, within certainly 5 to 10 years from now, we'll see a major revolution in education. We'll have K through graduate school in every language, in every subject, online, interactive, with very high quality. It's going to be a great leveler. And so that's one way in which we've increased skill. Another is through brain enhancement, and not yet primarily things that go inside our bodies and brains. I mean, there are some people with computers connected in their brains, like Parkinson's patients, but cochlear implants and so on. But I mean, just having these devices close at hand, they're a tremendous expansion of our access to knowledge and our intelligence. And it's going to get more and more intimate. That's a very broad trend. Computers were remote, and you had to be an engineer to use them, and now everybody uses them, and they're in our pockets and getting even more intimate. They're going on our eyes and in our ears and on our wrists, and they will go inside our bodies, and the sort of vanguard of that has already occurred. So that's another, ultimately that is the way in which we're going to make people smarter. So we're going to be enhancing ourselves. I alluded to expansion of the neocortex in the cloud earlier, and that's a major theme of this book. And so it's almost impossible to describe, because how could you describe in 1900 what the kind of work people would be doing in 2014? You'd have to, without inventing all of these new capabilities. But do you think that innovation is going to stop? It's going to explode. And the whole idea of Silicon Valley has become a metaphor. And as I go around the world, people say, oh, well, this neighborhood is the Silicon Valley of Paris, and this neighborhood is the Silicon Valley of Israel, and the Silicon Valley is everywhere now. And we've got this explosion of innovation to utilize these greater intellectual powers, inventing new things to do. So I don't think the answer, as Larry put it, was, oh, let's just have more time off and work less. I think more people can do what they have a passion for. And that's what struck me about this French strike. People really wanted to retire at 60, not 62. They obviously didn't have a passion for what they were doing. And many more people today do have a passion. I mean, back in 1900, when almost everybody was working on farms and factory, maybe some people had a passion, but basically they were happy to be able to support their families. Today, a lot of people get satisfaction, and they're moving up Maslow's hierarchy with the gratification of the creative work that they can do. More and more people will have the means and the intellectual capabilities and the access to information to be creative. And, so that's what I see as the future of work. We're going to be able to support the world's people without actually a lot of monetary resources. So we'll be able, three-dimensional printing, we'll be able to print the physical things we need, ultimately food and clothing, and in very creative ways. And energy, it's going to be very inexpensive. And we're also growing our economy, which is actually expanding exponentially. And the economic statistics completely ignore the law of accelerating returns. $100 of computation counts for $100 today, even though it's $1 trillion of computation circa 1970. So a kid in Africa with a smartphone is walking around with billions or $1 trillion of computation and communication and access to knowledge circa a few decades ago. But it still only counts for $100 of economic activity. So we factor out these fantastic gains in the economic statistics. So I'm actually not worried about it, because it's going to ultimately be very easy and require a very small fraction of our capacity for output to support all the material needs of the human race. And we'll have the opportunity for being very creative, and we're going to create all these new fields. We have so many fields today that didn't exist. We just look at music. I remember when I was growing up, there was basically pop music and classical music and jazz to some extent. I mean, now you've got hundreds of genres, and so we're going to see that continuation, that explosion of creativity. So that's my view of the future of work. So maybe it's not so different than what Larry's saying, and that we'll have more time to do what we love to do. That's another way of putting it.